Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for being here. I'm sorry I'm speaking English, but maybe it's going to be easier for the debate today. So I would thank Al Bawsala for co-organizing this event and using the opportunity that Professor Atiyah Waris is in Tunisia to organize this event. Just a context, Atiyah Waris is here as part of MINAFEM Annual Feminist Economic School that ended today. That we're very happy that we finished it. And we have some of our participants here from the school. So today we are meeting mainly for the launch in Tunisia of Professor Atiyah's book, Financing Africa, in French and in Arabic. And before that, I want to do a short introduction of Professor Atiyah Waris, and then before going to the book and discovering the book better, I would like to ask you more about your mandate, and then we'll go to it. So very quickly, Professor Atiyah Waris is a law professor at University of Nairobi, and she works at the intersection of development, debt, and human rights, and she is the UN independent expert, or as you know, special rapporteur on debt and the human rights. So Professor Atiyah, can you please tell us about your mandate and how can civil society in Tunisia and the Arabic-speaking world can connect with you to do advocacy and also for the challenge related to your mandate, especially in this context of crisis of trust in the international human rights law and the UN system.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I've had a wonderful couple of days already in Tunisia, and I'm looking forward to spending more time with what are an incredible group of people and a truly brave country, from what I can see. So I am as rapporteur on foreign debt and international financial obligations and its implications for human rights. It's a long mouthful. What I work on is issues around debt, taxation, all types of taxation at the global level. But I also look at all cross-border financial transactions, something that people refer to often as, for example, illicit financial flows. And the reason I look at them is because at its very core, no matter how you want to improve the standards of living of people across the world, at the end of the day, you're going to need money for it. You're either going to need money or the financial system is going to need to shift in certain ways so that you can actually achieve these particular rights. And so these three areas that I work on are basically the entire financing framework of the world. The joke about my mandate is that the only thing I don't cover is domestic debt. So once you remove domestic debt from the conversation, everything else on money and finance is covered by my mandate. And so there are big questions in the world right now on the reform of the UN, for example, financial repercussions there. There's also questions about the international financial architecture and how should that look like? How do we make sure that people on the ground benefit from it? And then how do we center it? And so my mandate covers three particular areas, which I call it my toolkit. Firstly, I get to report to the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly every year on a topic that I believe is of importance. It's my choice, which is a privilege to be able to do. And so, for example, my October report this year is going to be on finance and the high seas. And if you can see what is happening on the seas as we speak, then you can imagine the financial repercussions of it. But in October last year, my report to the General Assembly, for example, was finance and peace. So again, how finance works or doesn't work to make sure that we are living in a peaceful society. So those are the thematic reports. Then comes my country visits. So I am in Tunisia on an academic visit, but I also do technical visits at the invitation of the government, any government. If there's a particular issue bothering them and they need some advice, I am available for that. And then the third type of country visit is an official mission where I negotiate with a country and they either want me to come for a particular reason or I want to come for a particular reason. And then there's a report for that. So that's the second one. And the third one is my favorite tool. That's the one that I, really love letting loose on. And that is that I get to talk to global leaders. So people on the ground don't always get that opportunity. And I think that this is truly a privilege. You see a problem in the financial system, whether it is at the IMF or the World Bank or at the African Development Bank, right? It could be anywhere, but you don't know how to get to them. This is where my mandate becomes very useful, because if you write letters to me, if you let me know that there is a problem in your country or your region that needs some attention and it's having an effect specifically on the lives, the lifestyle, the poverty levels of people on the ground, then these are the sort of questions that I'm able to ask. And I think an easy example, because I've done a letter two-way on it, is I wrote to the IMF questioning some conditions of the loan agreement that they were negotiating with Sri Lanka. And then more recently, I wrote to Sri Lanka and asked them how they were dealing with their debt, because I thought there were some concerns. So there's nobody who is going to be special or excluded. I take the conversations in all the directions in order to try and push for solutions.
If I give a more concrete question about Tunisia. So as you know, in 2011, Tunisia had a revolution. And during the democratic period, we had a lot of campaigns on debt cancellation, because people of Tunisia, they consider the sovereign debt during and foreign debt during dictatorship is illegitimate debt. And even the parliament, if I remember well, I think 2016 had an initiative to reorganize debt and also to have a law on debt and also on debt cancellation. So this is an opportunity that we lost during the democratic transition. How can we do, if the opportunity is here again, to win this battle?
So there are calls in many countries across the world from domestic populations to try and get debt to be cancelled. And it happens in waves. Tunisia is not the first country. I'm sure it will not be the last country. But the biggest question is, the calls always come before a change in government. And then very often the government changes and then the call doesn't get fulfilled. So this is really where the question is. And I think that this is one of the biggest questions around an international financial architecture. If a leader was to step up tomorrow anywhere in the world while in power and go and tell the IMF or the World Bank, we cannot pay our debt, it is an illegal debt, we're not going to honor it, this is what is going to happen. Your currency is going to crash. So any leader who says that is really not a leader helping their population. I say this very, very carefully, and I will explain why. When you take a loan as a country from the IMF, the World Bank, BlackRock, whomever, your country is graded by credit rating agencies. And there are 3 of them. They're completely unregulated. You may have heard of them, Moody's, Standard & Poor's. And these are private companies registered in the United States. So it's a private company, unregulated by any special law. But for some reason, international institutions are using these rating agencies to grade countries. So now, I told you I don't cover domestic debt. But can you imagine if you walked up tomorrow and you went to the bank you've taken a loan from and you said, I can't pay my debt, you're declared bankrupt. Now, how do you declare a country bankrupt? You declare its currency as having no value. The language people use is junk status. So what does that mean? What does that mean? A real life example I can already give you is Argentina. 4.5, 5 years ago, I walked into Argentina in the morning. The Argentinian peso was at 248 per dollar. By evening, it was 284 per dollar. Nobody's salaries have changed, right? 6 months later, it hit 800. A year later, it settled at 1,200 pesos the dollar. Now, nobody's salaries are changing, and the dollar rate has gone down to being less than 25% of what it was worth, right? So your buying ability is lost completely. And that is why when opposition are coming in, when you have revolutions, those are calls you make because they make logical sense. But the moment you say it while you're a leader in power, you lose the trust of the international financial architecture. And this is part of the reason why I am part of a growing call to reform the international fiscal architecture, because I don't think that's fair, right? Because we've tied the hands of the leaders. But if you go back to that debt that country is now sitting on, now what do you do with it? You have no choice, you have to pay it. So now you start hearing things about hidden debt, odious debt. So how do we solve it? What would be a global solution? It's called debt cancellation. We need to call for global debt cancellation. I am part of the global programs around cancelling debt. The Pope is leading the charge on cancellation of global debt. It's his current Jubilee campaign. But it's going to take a lot of time. We need other organizations coming board, the Organization of Islamic Conference. This cannot just be one religious group. It needs to be across the world. This is a problem across the world. Countries are extremely fragile right now, and most of them are spending on defense.
One last question before moving to the book.
Yes.
And also we'll have time for a round of questions from the presence here, audience. So you mentioned that the whole international financial architecture is not fair, and the whole multilateral system that it's not working. And again, why are we still keeping hope or still engaging with the UN system, since it's not giving us justice? And I can mention here the genocide and all the effort that your colleague, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Palestinian cause, she tried to do, but this system is not giving us justice in the global South and the Arabic-speaking world. Why should we keep engaging with the system?
That's a hard question, because everybody has to make that decision, of course, themselves. But I will tell you why I am keeping on staying within that system and trying to push for it. I think that politics works in waves. Right now, the wave is a push towards unilateral action from some parts of the world. But I have to tell you that other parts of the world are still pushing multilateralism. So if you look at it from the country in which you're in, and then you see the rest of the world, what you will see is a change. People always presumed Europe and North America are pro-multilateralism. But I will tell you that in financial spaces, there has been no real change on the position of North America and Europe on fiscal issues. I say not much change. So there has been a little bit. But I see a different kind of change from the East, which is extremely positive. China is pushing for multilateralism at every single level, right? Many Asian countries are pushing for it. Africa is pushing for it. Latin America is pushing for it. I think it is who we thought were pushing for it, but now we have seen are not really, and then are very clearly looking at it from their personal perspectives, which they have absolutely the right to do because they want to protect their economies. But I see multilateralism as actually having shifting positions, with different countries now sort of coming into the forefront on it. And so why am I still in it? Well, I'm still in it because there is one beacon of hope, and that is in the international tax debates and discussions. 20 years ago, when I was working on international tax issues, it was unheard of that any change would happen. But we actually have an agreement at the United Nations to debate on a convention. at a point in time when there is fatigue on treaties. Nobody wants to negotiate treaties right now, but there is one being negotiated on taxation at the United Nations. It is the first time in 80 years of the United Nations that this is happening. So it is seminal, it is critical. But then I have to show you the other side. The pandemic treaty is stuck on fiscal issues. The plastics treaty is stuck on the financial formula. The climate discussions are stuck on finance. And there's a whole set of these that are all stuck on financial issues. So clearly, the world has pushed the conversation from your human rights are not okay, your protection is not working, you're not looking after your people. The whole world has pushed to the point where every single treaty and international discussion is stuck on finance, and this is when countries are shifting position. So for me, it means that the money is the answer, and it is the most important point. And so when you talk about other rapporteurs who are doing their best and then also have gotten a lot of pushback, I have to tell you that that is our role. Our role is to bring light to the issues, to push them as far as we can, and to continue to stand in the positions we are in, supporting international law positions. And that means that if countries have committed to an international law position, then we are going to remind them. And in a sense, sometimes I think we are the conscience of the system in many, many ways. And frankly, deserving of a lot of protection sometimes. But it's the reality, right? And of course, even with her, the reaction was finance. The pressure point was financial sanctions. So yes, so literally, doesn't matter who you talk to, whatever the pressure point is, money and the way money is managed tends to be the biggest pressure point that countries use against people and other countries.
Talking about finance and financing Africa, your book, what motivates you to write about this? And if you can give us, what are the most important takeaways that we can take from the book for the people who didn't have access to it yet?
Yeah. So you know, I don't know how to explain the joy I feel about this book because it took me over 15 years to write it. And the reason I fought to write it was because every time I would talk to people about Africa and the countries in Africa, people would say, oh, Africa is not mappable. We don't have data on Africa. Therefore, we can, you know, and so people would say things. I would be in international fora where people would be talking about my country, Kenya, and they'll be saying things that are not true. But the same thing they're saying that is not true is what is used to then make a policy change, right, at a global level. And I got really angry. This is me angry. So it's like, this is not okay. And so I was tired of it. And I was like, I'm going to fix it. I'm never going to ever let anybody come and tell me that my continent cannot be mapped, that you cannot know things about my continent. And then as I would write the book, as I was writing the book, I realized that the more important audience was not even the rest of the world. For me, the more important audience became Africans. Because if we don't know our continent, then how will we tell people what our continent is about? And so I only used publicly available data. This was not a book to, you know, have a big headline and, you know, show the world something they didn't know. This was a book to say, here's what's out there about African countries as much as possible. And then here's what you need to know. And at the same time, it was to make somebody over the age of 18 try and understand why they need to invest in their country. When I say invest, I mean pay their taxes, make sure they're part of the system, fight to make sure the system is safe. And so then I discovered something else, that there was very little data on a lot of African countries. So then my joke was, the reason I only took 15 years is because there isn't that much out there. 15 years, therefore, is not a lot of time for 55 plus countries, right? And so then I started to engage with, and this is the thing I love also truly about the book, is I started to engage in African proverbs. And the reason I've engaged with African proverbs is because when I couldn't find a way to explain something technical, I wanted to explain it with a story. And so I've explained it with stories. And I can tell you one of my favorite ones, which is a Kenyan proverb. And it says that we may share the same sun, but we don't share the same roofs. And if you want to understand the continent, then you know each country is different, but we are all in this one solid landmass, right? But then also, if you like unpack it even deeper, we will apply a tax law or a debt law or a finance rule, and it'll not have the same effect, because somebody may have a fabulous cement roof, like, you know, we're sitting next to, but somebody else may have a grass thatched roof. Somebody may have no roof. Somebody may be sleeping in a tree, or somebody may be in a desert. So then how does this financial system then make sense to somebody with such a different context and understanding? And so this is why I loved using these fabulous African proverbs to explain things.
Okay, I will ask a last question before moving to, I think that you are interested to hear more about people today.
Yeah.
So I know if we look at Africa and to the map of our continent, the first thing we think of is our natural resources that are stolen from colonization. And how is it possible to finance Africa at a time of both colonization and authoritarian regimes?
Wow. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges facing the continent right now, is how do we move forward, right? But we have a great set of, I used to talk about it like it's the missing middle, the African Union that was just never visible enough, active enough, you know, accessible enough. But now I have to tell you that we have the African Development Bank. And we have the Export-Import Bank, the Africa Exim Bank, for example. And they got downgraded, by the way, by a credit rating agency. And we understand it's because they set up a currency transaction point on the continent to bypass New York's dollar exchange rates. So there is a push at the African level to unionize financial services, to build infrastructure across the continent. And if you look at individual countries, they're fighting back. For example, people will say, you're building a road through my community, right? But the reality on the ground is we need the network of roads, we need the network of rails, we need to refresh the train system, you know, Tunisia clearly does, right? So we need a train system, we need to make sure that flights are moving from one part of the continent to the other direct. Like, we need to be able to see each other and be with each other and engage with each other. But these minerals, if the wars in the world are anything to go by, we need to make sure that we are using our minerals for us, that our titanium doesn't land on a missile that kills little girls in a school somewhere, right? These are the realities on the ground that we have to deal with. And I think it is this consciousness, having people truly engage at a Pan-African level and be Pan-Africanists and demand of their governments and prioritize it. And then when they're being asked to prioritize other things, which currently is happening because the voices are not as loud. And I think this is something in the book really worth looking at. I did a mapping of the African continent, and I showed where you may have a law to do public participation, but you may not have a law that allows you to access financial information. So you'll participate with no knowledge, right? On how to fix the financial system. So we need that rhythm. And I think for me, this book provides a really great space to start to neutralize differences between different countries, no matter what type of political regime, and make sure that we have these similarities that allow us to speak to each other. And I would be remiss if I did not talk about sanctions or, you know, illegal measures, UCMs, unilateral coercive measures, and the effect of war. Two countries I could not map, Zimbabwe and Somalia. One because of a war, but the other one because it was under unilateral coercive measures. These were not even legal Security Council sanctioned rules, but it means I can't get data. I couldn't get data. Now, if we don't bypass countries that are specifically attacking countries on the continent and protect them, right, especially if they're not doing anything illegal, then we are going to lose a very big opportunity. And currently the AU is the biggest voting bloc in the world. These 55 countries are united, so we need to really push that conversation.
I think this also brings us to the Strait of Hormuz and the war on Iran and Lebanon by the US and Israeli-led war. But maybe I give the opportunity to people here to ask, and maybe we'll answer this later. باهي يعيشكم كي تاخذوا الكلمة تقدموا رواحكم وتنجموا تحكيوا بالعربي ولا بالانجلي. مريم تحب تعدي الميكرو؟ عندنا هوني وبعد
Wissal Shafiq. I have a comment and then a question.
Can you please introduce yourself?
Okay, Wissal Shafiq, International Relations Specialist and participant from MENA School on Feminist Economics. I have a comment and a question, and my comment is that when as an international relations specialist, I see a lot that, for example, countries like mine, like Morocco, they rely a lot on dealing with other countries, specifically using sovereign risk. Like whenever they want to go in a multilateral or bilateral agreements with any country, or even diplomatic relations, they go for a study by Moody's, BlackRock, by Standard & Poor's, by any consultant agency, by even McKinsey at some points, to actually decide on that relationship rather than talking to the country in the first hand and seeing eye to eye. So how do you circumvent that? Because you mentioned it as well in your presentation. And my second question is, what do you think about multipolarity? We talk a lot about multilateralism, but multipolarity is also mentioned a lot in the polemic space, especially with India, for example, and China in East Asia, with South Africa, and with maybe also Brazil and other countries in Latin America.
Shall we take a round and then you answer? Okay.
Is it on? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Sahar Mishmish. I'm the Inclusive Economies Manager with the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy. I have two questions. One is on last year's report on finance and peace. I wanted to ask, how many people have you told I told you so to about that? And then my second question is specifically on vulnerable countries in Africa and MENA, and especially fragile and conflict-affected countries. We see that fiscal policy, both from IFIs as well as countries, tend to aim towards the regressive policies of VAT or sales taxes or other taxes on consumption. And their excuse for that is that it's easier to mobilize, the state doesn't have capacity yet to mobilize progressive taxes, and we need resources very urgently. But we know that not only are they unequal, but even by like orthodox economics, they're detrimental to growth, to tax compliance, etc. So my question is, how do we make sure that we can mobilize the resources needed to meet the immediate needs of the population in terms of social services and reconstruction, etc., while also making sure that the institutions that we're building are not regressive and the policies we're building are not regressive, especially since I'm not really convinced by the IMF's or other institutions' option of now we do regressive and then we do progressive, because we know there's nothing more permanent than a temporary policy. So thank you.
ممكن ناخذ سؤال آخر بعدين.
So hi, Assalamualaikum. I'm Raouf from Debt for Climate. I'm Africa Regional Coordinator with Debt for Climate. And so we're working on some debt audit in Senegal and trying to do the same in some other countries. And we're thinking about showing how the debt are illegal or illegitimate in these countries, and also thinking, can we use this in the international law, like to move into litigation and something? Is this something useful to do it, or how it is?
let's answer this.
Well, thank you very much for very diverse and very interesting questions. So the African Union has actually set up an African credit rating agency. The concerns have been that the reason the Exim Bank was downgraded was actually because of the creation of not only the rating agency, but because of the currency transaction point in Kampala. So there's like a global pushback to prevent other entities, we believe, to set up the same thing that is being set, that's already been set up at a private level. So how does that help us, right? So if we already have an African public rating agency, which has been authorized to be set up, and it's there, one of the discussions that I have been having with them is don't just rate the African continent. You have to rate the rest of the world as well, because that's the only way you can do these comparisons. And so what we need to make sure is that all of our countries are being rated by what is a public rating agency, not a rating agency that's a private company. And if I can take a second to explain the credit rating agencies, gives me a lot of concern. Their interest from the beginning was never to rate a country. Their interests were to rate companies, to see whether they were worth investing in. The problem is companies are cross-border. So they now started to rank countries in order to rank the company branch inside the country. So this rating was never intended for a country's assessment. And then if you join me in just following the thinking, when a company takes a loan, when a human being takes a loan, it is to build an asset that will hopefully make a profit. Even if you're buying your first house, it's to save your rent, right? There is an action of growth in it. But countries take a loan to build a dam. The dam may take 40 years to fill. So where's that profit? Where's that interest that gets generated that'll allow the country to pay back? And then where's the rating that says, oh yeah, you're good for it and you're profitable? The logic defeats me. And very often I tell people, it can be a very technical space for sure, but just look at the logic. Just follow practicality and and then link it to your own personal lives, and then that should be able to take you there. So that's one of the first things. Yes, go for it.
Can I just use this opportunity to do a follow-up question about also the possibility of UN credit?
Yes.
Because a lot of academics, they are criticizing this demand as the private credit rating agencies, they will always be consulted and their opinions will be. Does this apply also to the African credit agency?
So the thing I like about the model of the African Credit Rating Agency is it's a public one. It's going to be a state level one. It's not a private company making profit somewhere in the world, right? So that's why I like it. Could there be a UN credit rating agency? Absolutely. In a lot of the debates I go into about the creation of an international financial architecture, one of the pieces in it could be a credit rating agency. But I'm going to come back and tell you, I don't like the concept of a credit rating agency from its get-go. Because it's basically asking, are you good for it? We're human beings. What happens when there's a cyclone? Are we still good for it? No. We're on recovery mode. If you look at a country like the Bahamas, for example, because I was there, when I went in, they were still paying off the first loan of 4 loans they had taken to rebuild the same architecture after 4 cyclones. So they would build, it's underwater. They take a loan, build again, it's underwater. Surely where's the logic, right? Why are we destroying people whose lives are already destroyed, who are living in tents? So I don't like the concept of a rating agency. I don't think there should be interest rates, for example, for nations to take on debt. But if we're going to do that, then let's make sure that it's data that is publicly available, that we can all see, that we can work with, that that we can critique, we can analyze, and we can punch holes into, which is not where we are right now. And then that takes me to your question about consulting firms. So I really struggle with any country that thinks it's okay for foreigners to be better advising them than their own locals. Like, I struggle with that, like, honestly. I don't think that I know better than a Tunisian about Tunisia, right? It's just not possible. So I think that this is something that we really need to think about and reflect on, and then see where it's going, and then look at the intention. If you look at the intention of a profit-making entity, their advice is to make a profit and then have you coming back for more advice. And then they give you the opposite advice. But if you go into your public academic institutions, your think tanks, your research centers, even civil societies sometimes, extremely well thought out, debated, argued issues, that is a better place, right? And so I think that becomes a really important space. And then, so yes, so the multilateralism also has multipolarity, right? So we've got BRICS, we've got, in Africa, we've now got the Organization of the Sahel, for example. There are new entities popping up all the time. But they are coming together at a smaller regional level based on shared agreements. BRICS is like the OECD. There is just a counterpoint of a different set of economies that are now middle income, emerging, growing, getting wealthier, and so have shared issues. And they're pushing for that. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't mean it's not multilateral. It just means that all the power is not in one space. And that's not a bad thing. I think we need a dilution of power across the world right now, because I keep reminding people, look at what happened because we all relied on the US dollar. Like, I don't even have to explain that to anybody. We are all directly affected by the decision in one country on the decisions they make that affects how much money we have and how much we hold. No, I haven't told anybody I told you so, but feel free to throw my report at people and feel free to say that. It was fascinating because I chose the topic of the report over 2 years ago, simply because I truly believe that if you want to start in finance, you have to make sure that finance is pushing peace. That was really where I came from. And it came from a space because, and we talked about the genocide in Palestine, but for me, it came from a space of taxpayer money is being withheld from the Palestinian Authority at the time, 2 or 3 years ago. And at the same time, the taxpayer money is doing what? It's sitting within the Israeli government. And so you're starving a population using a financial tool. And if I fast forward into issues around armies, and I've been looking at a long time at army data at CIPRI, for example, and you would see the amount being spent on armament kept going up. And I think for me, it was COVID that started my journey in the financing on peace, was because I realized that in COVID, I never heard about lack of employment in the military industries. There were no firings. And so I kept asking myself, and this was COVID, so what's happening to the bullets? And where's the weapons and the bombs? What's happening to those? And they were being stockpiled. And my joke to somebody was, it's going to be buy one, get one free after COVID ends, and we're going to have an increase in wars. And this is the I told you so part of it that I did share with people. So thank you for that question. I really appreciate it. But the issue around progressive and regressive taxes is also really important. So now people talk about VAT as though it's progressive. So we have to also be really careful. VAT is being discussed now as progressive in some spaces. So let's talk about taxes. So let's talk about taxes that allow us to redistribute wealth, right? I think that there is no conscionable reason to tax people the same amount for their consumption, especially of their basic necessities. We cannot have taxes on food. We cannot have taxes on fuel in public transport, for example. There is certain areas that we need to create red lines around and protect. But if I take you back to my book, only, I think it was 3% of Malawians over the age of 18 pay income tax. Only 1% of Senegalese over the age of 18 pay income tax. The biggest pushback we're continuing to receive from corporates is that the human beings are also not paying income tax. So let's also get the human beings to pay that simple amount of tax. Or as I say to people, some of them are not even supposed to pay tax. They just have to declare their taxes. That's it. But they're not doing that. So we need the human beings to declare the taxes, which is great. And then let's make sure the corporates do it as well. And to date, I have not received an answer from either the IMF or anywhere else as to why it's a 15% tax when human beings are paying 35. It's like I said, I just use logic. This is not making logical sense to me. And so if you come to the issue of debt for climate, yes, court cases can be filed. And there are many conversations around the world about hidden debt and odious debt. And remember in the beginning when I spoke, I said a country will never be able to say it. People have to say it. Organizations have to say it. Groups of organizations can say it. But a country, if the existing leadership of a country stands up and says, we cannot pay our debt, the repercussions are just too much on poor people. So take the responsibility. It's a big bite. It's a big thing to chew on. But please, yes. If you have evidence and data for that, I would definitely recommend going for court cases.
Very much. مازال عنا أسئلة؟ أي بيسان.
Well, it's a small. My name is Bisan Kassab. Minafem alumni. I would like to ask you. It's a small question about when you are comparing 15% as a minimum and maximum flat rate of companies versus 35%. I know. Why did you assume that there is 35%? It's 35% tax on individuals. I mean, for example, in Egypt, the maximum one is 27%, and actually, on the other side, it should be higher for the wealthier. But anyways, it's 27%. I just can't get where the 35% came from. Thank you. Other things we will discuss.
Sure, no problem. Shall I take the question?
Yeah, sure.
There's, okay.
Thank you very much. Yes. My name is Nada Triqi. I am from the Tunisian Observatory of Economy. Very happy that you are here in Tunisia. Basically, another tagline is there is blood on the budget lines. And this is, for me, was one of the good stories, because now we are living it when we see that a rooftop of a school has fallen over the kids because of austerity. So how do we push back? This is the thing, because many of the organizations that are already here have done a lot in terms of pushing, but I think we should diversify more of the strategies. And here I want to ask about two aspects. One is the immunity of these institutions, the World Bank and IMF. How can we challenge this immunity? On court case, or I know that many have done popular tribunals and these initiatives, but how can we concretely hold them accountable to change their policies according to you? The second thing is that I wanted to also have your point of view with regards to this thing of trust. You said that we have to not lose the trust of creditors and international institutions, and that is also a tagline that is very used to justify whatever bullshit, I'm sorry, policies that can rob us of our agency as a society and rob us of resources. So I want to challenge a little bit of trust. To which extent? especially that trust comes also with the package of technical assistance that we need to also trust, and you have written about the topic. So yes, I want to hear from you on this. Thank you.
Hello, Professor عطية. I'm so happy to be with you. I'm Haneen Shaheen. I am the Ecological Justice Advisor and Campaign in at MENA Fem Movement Organization. I want you to talk to us more also about that tax convention and whether it's gonna support it. As we know now, especially during this like moment in the international world and the multilateral world, they are trying to kill or hinder or like stop any new convention that's going to put liability requests, asks on countries and companies as well. With the banks coming in, it's very challenging to ask the taxes to be like properly paid, to be like adjusted properly, and but by the end, we are the people who are like paying these taxes, not the companies, not the corporates, so on and so forth. So I wonder if you can like elaborate more on the convention and whether the convention is going to benefit and whether they are going to kill it before it is born. Thank you.
Okay. عندنا سؤال آخر؟
Yeah. One more? Okay.
So just on this point, the IMF and the World Bank are technically UN institutions, although they don't act like it. And we heard from the board of the IMF that they're engaging more with the UN. I don't know if that's your impression, probably not. But so my question is specifically on the book and other research by the UN, to what extent it engages with issues of political economy. And you talked a little bit about how policy is country specific and you can't really go in with a recipe to any country and really have it be successful. And especially when we talk a lot about decolonizing a lot of our spaces and bringing back sovereignty to the countries, but we know that some of our countries are less than democratic, and we know that at the decision-making level, there usually ties to the elite and to a specific class of people that would benefit from the more regressive policies. So I wanted to ask to what extent you engage with that in your research, in your book, or in your reports, around how that issue also comes against the more dry economic research that we usually find in these spaces. Thank you.
الياس بن عمار، نقابي وعضو مجموعة العمل من أجل ديمقراطية الطاقة بتونس. أريد أن أسأل المقاربة التي تقدمينها مقاربة متماهية ربما مع منطق المؤسسات المالية العالمية، وحتى اعتبار مثلا الأمم المتحدة والاتحاد الأفريقي كمنظمات محايدة ربما هو في تماهي مع الخطاب السائد للمؤسسات المالية العالمية. أنا أريد أن أسأل هل أنه يمكن بناء بديل دون هذه المؤسسات؟ حتى الدولة، نحن تحدثت عن الدول، هذه دول تابعة لا يرجى منها خير. للأسف في إفريقيا النخب تابعة، وبالتالي نريد نموذج جديد، نموذج يقطع حتى مفهوم التنمية. ما معنى التنمية؟ هل التنمية أنك تبني سد؟ هل التنمية أنك توصل نسبة كهرباء مثلا في تونس 99%، ولكن ماذا يعني 99%؟ والشعب ونحن نعيش في تبعية، أي مشروع لابد من قرض بالعملة الصعبة. وبالتالي أعتقد أنه أريد ربما مقاربة خارجة مما يسمى هذا الصندوق النيوليبرالي الذي يهيمن على العالم. شكرا.
Yeah, so just we've seen a lot of like in many spaces now they're talking a lot about debt swap and the debt swap project, and like we're seeing it very dangerous for us at least. And recently in Santa Marta in the fossil fuel conference, in the final report, we're seeing a lot of like they were hiding it but also saying like debt cancellation, but then a new form of financing and like financing project and all. So I'm thinking like how can the country refuse the project of the debt swap? Now we're seeing a lot of them accepting them, and maybe you can talk about South-South corporation to protect each others or something like this, but at least how dangerous the debt swap is by giving legitimacy to an illegitimate debt. So, yeah.
So I will use the opportunity to also ask some follow-up questions. Yeah, one question is the follow-up of Hanin's question about the UN Tax Convention. And as I know, maybe I'm not following very well the process, the US stepped out of the conversation. So how do you evaluate or assess this? And also the IMF is also not part of the conversation. Is it an opportunity of both of them are not part of the discussion or not? Another question is my favorite. I think that everywhere I have the opportunity, I talk about it, is as an economist, and traditional economists, they love doing correlations. And then they did a lot of papers to tell us there is no correlation between democracy and development. So we don't care about democracy. Is it not our responsibility now, as people engaging in these spaces, to also to ask for democracy? We are asking it for at international level to reform the quota system or to just dismantle these IFIs, but also at national level. It should not be this as part of our mandate as organizations, as activists, as humans. And the last question is about the US and the Israeli war on Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. And here, of course, in Tunisia, we are affected, but mainly about the injustice that we are following on our people in Iran and our people in Lebanon. But maybe we are not affected yet about the economic impact. So what we should expect economically, and can we do anything about it? And this should be all for now.
Yes, okay. I hope you have your blankets and you're ready to be here for quite a while. No, okay. So no, thank you for, again, like incredible questions. This is such a pleasure. It's also not often I get a chance to have a fabulous debate with incredible minds. So this is really great. So the question about the 15% corporate income tax versus 35, the reason I say 35 is the highest I've seen for individuals. And the ones that I've seen so far. There may be some now that are higher, but 35 seemed to be as far as countries could push human beings. But then we only push companies to 15. And 15 is supposed to be the floor, not the ceiling. But it's being treated like a ceiling. So even that, for me, was a question. Like, why is it being treated as a ceiling? It should be, meaning it's supposed to be the minimum.
I mean, we are used to see that companies' taxes is a flat one. So I don't think there is a ceiling and a bottom. No?
No. So different countries will have different corporate income tax rates for different types of companies, even different types of industries. But for multinational corporations, there hasn't been a fixed one. And the idea is to remove the conversation from a domestic control to a global control, and then have countries around the world agree on what this sort of minimum looks like, so that we're not competing over the taxes. We're competing because you have a bigger market share, or you have more labor, or you have the minerals or the agricultural produce, not because of the tax. The idea is to take the tax conversation out of the investment conversations. But so far, that's where they're sitting. But the reason I question the 15% is because when you measure how much it takes to fix your infrastructure or your healthcare system or your education system, which the people in that company, whether they are employees or otherwise or related to them, are going to use, you're going to drive your car to get to the company, right, to work. So all of these conversations become really important. So is that measure 15%? No, it's not. If the human being is hitting 25, 27, 35%, that means that that's where there's what I would say is the cost benefit, right? That's where it balances off, and then the country is not going to go into a default because it can't earn enough revenue to do its work. But then remember that the individuals also still pay VAT on top of that 35% or 27%. But the corporates get to offset the VAT, because VAT works that if I receive VAT, I can give VAT. But the individual doesn't have the right to receive, only gives. So your taxes are going up, but the corporates are staying in the same position. So that is the reason why I use that as a comparative. Of course, there are countries in the world that have a 0% corporate income tax or a negative one as well, depending on subsidies. And yeah, I love my phrase of blood on the budget lines. Like, it's part of the whole peace finance and all the war issues I used to look at, because I used to look at countries' budgets and there'd be these massive documents and nobody would ever read them. And I would say, but don't you realize, if you don't know how much you spent on food or how much you spent on education, that there will be a child who's going to go and have to work. So this is not just about military spending. And if that child has to work at a very young age, then that same child might die doing child labor mining. That's also blood on the budget lines. I want people to see beyond militarization for it. And so, yeah, it got a lot of traction. It's one of my tweetable moments, I think. So thanks for quoting it as well. But I also think that what could be the strategies? And I think we have to start from the point of each of these countries and communities are unique, and there can be no blueprint. But I also truly believe that the solution rests within the country. The country understands itself better than anybody else. The communities understand themselves better than anyone else. So if we are to start that way, then if we look at the political landscape, I really believe that anybody working in government or politics must be using public services, cannot be using private services, must use the public bus system, must send their children to public schools, right? Must feel the problem that they're supposed to be resolving. And I think that we have to start there. And then the second thing, and this is what I call the sort of corporatization of the political spaces, is that we've continued to not tax corporates. People who work in corporates and own them have continued to become wealthier and wealthier because they're not being taxed. And now we're coming full circle where we're seeing more and more corporate leaders in political spaces. And the reason is because they have that capital to then now present themselves for elections and win them. And then they enter into the space, and the same solutions that allowed them to remain wealthy and to grow in their wealth is what they then see as the solution. But it's impoverished people in the process. So that strategy is not working. And actually that's why we're in the position we are in now in the world, is because we just were not taxing. And that's why, for example, digital companies were not taxed and they're insanely wealthy. But it doesn't make logical sense that somebody has that amount of money that they don't even know what to do with. That they now have private foundations that you then now go to get money to do development. And then I would say, well, just pay your taxes. Let the government then sort those problems. And I don't claim or assume that any of these countries are perfect. I don't claim that the people in them are perfect. Everybody's also making loads of mistakes as we go along. But I really think the decisions must be in those public spaces and not in private corporatized spaces. And so for me, participation is really critical. And I do talk a little bit about political economy. I should point out that I'm not an economist. So I love the way this is like economists are talking. But remember, I'm not. I'm a lawyer, right? I'm a fiscal law specialist. So I study economic data to try and make sense of why my laws look like the way they look like and what the challenges are. And so in that whole conversation around the UN institutions and how to deal with it, decolonizing these spaces, I think there's a massive push to reform the UN. We have the UN at 80 ongoing right now. And I think that it's at one of the most critical junctures ever, because if they do not reform it carefully and properly and they do not give equal access to every single country in the world in the sense in which it has been recognized with the borders that they recognize. If we do not flatten that space, it stands a very strong chance of becoming completely moribund. It might be completely ignored going into the future. And the multipolarity that we're seeing in the world means that these spaces of power and decision-making will move to other spaces. So, example, you have the Board of Peace being set up. These are all things that are the result of an inability of the UN sort of bring itself into the space. But we are all equally at fault because we haven't capacitated the UN also to push forward those arguments. So I think Security Council needs to be completely removed. I don't think anybody should have a veto power. I don't think that peace and security issues should be separated from living standards of people and the right to live good lives. I think General Assembly can do all of that, for example. And there has to be an equality in the voting of nations. And I think we can try to, I mean, I heard the question of, nobody's impartial and how do we reform the world. And I mean, I'd like to tell us to do a stop and a restart, but I don't think the world has that appetite. So what I look at is how can we solve my fiscal issues? That's what I care about, the money issues that I think are not dealt with. And these are issues that the world has never had appetite to put on the table at one time in one place and discuss it. And I think that is a critical solution. Having that credit rating agency, currency regulation point, export-import banking systems, discussing the financial data and making sure it's not in a private space like at the Bank of International Settlements. Having all of that there on the table and having countries see exactly what people are doing on the ground and then just being fair. And of course, it will be fraught. No doubt. It's not an easy conversation. But we need to move towards that equality. Because if we don't, you're going to hear people saying we need to keep people in their countries, they're coming and taking up our services. Well, yes, because there isn't equality in those global decision-making processes. And poorer countries pay higher interest rates than wealthier countries. So stop that. Fix the actual problem, not the movement problem, right? The movement for me is like a symptom of the problem, not the actual issue. But then, everybody who works in their field will turn around and say that their field is the solution, right? So, feel free to tell me a little bit otherwise, and I'm very open to that. Debt swaps are so not the solution. I did a report on climate finance a couple of years ago to the Human Rights Council. And at the back of the report, I actually put in all the different types of debt instruments that are now these, innovative new. I think there were like 15 or 20 different types at that point in time. Sorry, I'll slow down. And I have to tell you that I can't see the formula. And this is what I told the European Parliament when I spoke there. I said, if you want to stop climate change, right, and you want to measure the formula on how much to trade off on debt, then you need to take that factory in Europe, in that particular case, and you need to pick up the factory and move it into a developing country where it can pollute away, okay? And then you need to measure the land that you've released. You need to convert it into a set of trees. And then we are equalizing the world. Then you will tell me how much profit you're making from that factory, how much you made in the past, and then we're going to talk about the formula for the debt swap. And unless you can give me that figure, I am not going to buy that any debt swap is working. I need the formula. I got a lot of interesting feedback on that argument. I'm still waiting to hear whether they're going to be moving any big industries across to developing countries. And so that brings me to Iman's question. For me, it's about the fiscal social contract. I think if you take me full circle on everything, it's about the social contract. And many years ago, I did a piece of research on African constitutions. And I just looked at one thing. I looked at what does the constitution in every single African country say about taxation and debt and their ability to take it. And I will tell you, there are countries that don't even talk about tax in their constitutions. that don't talk about the resources that are going to be used to resolve issues. So there's no mention of money, right? Like, I remember one constitution that just says, there shall be a contingency fund. That's it. That's all it said. And then, on the other hand, I looked at the same set of constitutions and I asked, okay, so what does it say about raising living standards, removing poverty, and making sure there's development, right? And it was very interesting because they also said a mixed bag. But more often than not, it was really the push from the UN to put bills of rights into constitutions, which meant to me that they were putting like one half of it, but not putting the other part of it. We have a proverb that says, a single bangle doesn't jingle. If you're wearing a bracelet, you know what I mean, right? So it doesn't make any noise because it's not working together. So that's what it felt like. I was looking at a constitution that was saying, these are all the things you need to do to make people's lives better, but wasn't saying, and here's how you're going to financially make that happen. And so even when I think about democracy and taking things forward, I always come back to the financing issue because that is what I work on. And I think that that's where the mistake tends to be in many scenarios. And so your last question, no surprise, very small question, you know. We can solve it in an instant. The war that the US and Israel have begun against Iran. So again, an accident of fate that my report for October is going to be about finance in the high seas. And it was the conversation I hoped I will get also from people here, but I already heard about the conversation has really focused on the people and the humans. But I want you to imagine that more than 60% of the earth is the high seas. And as long as you have a sea territory, then you can put fishing boats out there. But if you're landlocked, you're supposed to have access. But people don't have access. And people don't even have access on the high seas because some flotillas, I think, have also been stopped on the high seas. So what does high seas mean, right? And there's mining that can take place in the high seas. There is fishing, there's tourism, but people dump waste in the high seas, right? Now you see military movements on the high seas, and there isn't an authority to stop it. And so when we look at solutions to problems of countries choosing to attack each other from very, very far, the high seas becomes the mode of transport to get them there. And I think for me, it's very telling that this is the one space that continues to be quite unregulated. And the high seas, outer space, all of these belong to what we call global commons or common heritage of mankind. I'm like, where's my share? What is my share? I mean, I don't say it lightly. And why am I allowing military equipment to go through my part of those seas? Because it's common heritage of mankind. So what does that mean, right? And I'm struggling with that report because I will soon submit it. But this is a conversation that is very live for me because we have agency not only over our geographical land, we have agency, the right to participate, we have the right to access the high seas, whether you're landlocked or not. And have we just allowed people to make the use of it because they have more money, more capital, more power, more technology, and the skills that we don't have? And how does one then control that space? Because common heritage means I also own a share of it. It reminds me of when a bank goes bust. It happens very often, in many parts of the developing world. And you may have a bank account there. It has happened to me. And I remember seeing, a hotel built by some of the bank directors, and I used to go and I used to say, that brick is mine. So whoever stayed in that room in that hotel, I deserve 5 shillings of whatever the daily amount is. But the reason I use an example like this, because the high seas belongs to me too. Where's my share of that piece? But where's my share of that revenue? Where's my share of that research? And where's my share of wanting that to be a peaceful space, right? Like, what are those considerations? But I want to stop there because It's been a fascinating conversation. I don't know if you have more questions.
Yeah. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation and for joining us. I'm very proud to be with you today.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that maybe bilateral questions will come during the break. Maybe someone from Al-Bawsala come to say something? Or Brahim est demandé à l'appel à la réception.
شكرا أستاذ عطية، شكرا إيمان، شكرا مينا فهم على فهمت على التقديم. ما عنديش حاجة كبيرة باش نقولها الحقيقة. ما فهمت نشكركم على الديبا، كان ثري جدا وأسئلة كانت تهمنا. أوكي شيرين واضح. في النهاية ما عنديش حاجة كبيرة باش نقولها. معنا نثمن معنا فهمت كل ما قيل، كل ما الأسئلة اللي طرحت، الإجابات والإضافة نتاع الأستاذة عطية. ننتظر الاطلاع على الكتاب نتاعك، الحقيقة ما طلعتش عليه فهمت. نشكركم مرة أخرى ونحل الكلمة لإيمان.